Many modern historians point to a lack of Egyptian records and question whether Moses ever existed, or if the Exodus is a historical reality. To validate the biblical account, we have to look at this map. This shows the ancient Near East during the Late Bronze Age, roughly 1550 to 1200 BC, highlighting the exact geopolitical borders and massive influence of the Egyptian Empire. The text provides a starting metric. Jacob's family migrated to Egypt in 1876 BC, which kicks off a 430-year countdown. This timeline makes the Exodus a testable historical claim. We can take these dates and map them directly onto the archaeological record. The geopolitical landscape shifted violently in 1570 BC, when a native Egyptian pharaoh named Ahmose expelled a group of foreign rulers known as the Hyksos. Ahmose's victory ushered in the New Kingdom period. Under this new regime, Egypt became the undisputed imperial superpower of the ancient world. For the new Egyptian ruling class, the rapidly growing Hebrew population looked like a severe security threat. Pharaoh's systemic response was state-sponsored enslavement. He conscripted the Israelites into forced labor, utilizing them for brutal brickmaking and construction projects on an industrial scale. 4 centuries after arriving as guests, the Hebrew population had become a conscripted labor force, shackled to the infrastructure projects of the world's most powerful empire. Archaeologists and scholars have debated for decades over exactly when the Exodus occurred. One popular theory suggests a late date of 1290 BC. This is primarily based on the biblical text mentioning that the Hebrew slaves built a storage city called Ramses. But we can check this against a specific chronological formula found in 1 Kings chapter 6. It states that exactly 480 years elapsed between the Exodus and the 4th year of King Solomon's reign. By starting at the year 967 BC, Solomon's 4th year, and measuring backward exactly 480 years, we get a highly specific target. This calculation firmly places the Exodus at the early date of 1446 BC. Penning down this date gives us a temporal anchor, allowing us to align the biblical narrative directly with documented pharaohs of Egypt's 18th dynasty. Using the 1446 BC timeline, the pharaoh who ordered the Hebrew infants killed aligns with Thutmose I. 80 years later, the ultimate ruler Moses directly confronts to demand freedom is Amenhotep II. These 10 strikes were targeted. Turning the Nile to blood struck Hapi, the river god, while the destruction of livestock and grain through hail and locusts paralyzed the empire's agricultural supply and economic lifeblood. These strikes escalated from disabling the environment to shattering the empire's religious confidence, eventually plunging the entire nation into 3 days of chaotic darkness. The final breaking point was the Passover, resulting in a complete annihilation of the Egyptian military forces at the Red Sea. This sequence of events shattered the political and religious grip of the 18th dynasty, achieving the historical liberation of Israel. With the rescue out of Egypt complete, the narrative pivots to the required response from the Israelites. 1 year after their escape, the Israelites camped at the base of Mount Sinai, surrounded by a harsh, jagged landscape. Here, the text records God giving Moses the law, specifically a collection of rules known as the Book of the Covenant. The structure of the Mosaic Covenant perfectly matches the suzerainty treaties of the Late Bronze Age. These were formal legal agreements made between a great king and a vassal state. To see how this worked, we can look at this dark basalt stele showing the Code of Hammurabi. Comparing the biblical text to pre-existing ancient legal documents like this shows us the historical context of the covenant. God was utilizing the standard legal vernacular of the 15th century BC to formally establish Israel as a sovereign, structured nation. We see the archaeological validation of this new nation in the hieroglyphic text on the Merneptah stele, which contains the earliest extra-biblical historical reference to Israel as an established people. The Exodus took a fractured, enslaved labor force and consolidated them into a unified, self-governing culture. The record of the Exodus tracks a people's migration out of imperial servitude and into a structured national identity defined by a specific legal code. In 1550 BC, Egypt operated as the dominant power of the Near East, defined by its massive stone monuments and an unmatched military. This empire functioned as an extraction economy. Its survival depended on the exploitation of a massive workforce, treated as state-owned human property. The native Egyptian ruling class had recently regained control of their country by expelling foreign rulers known as the Hyksos, but they faced an immediate demographic crisis. This chart shows the rapid growth of the Israelite population living in the Nile Delta. Over several centuries, a single family of 70 grew to roughly 2 million, creating a population that threatened to overwhelm the native Egyptian elite. To maintain control over this majority, the Pharaoh instituted a statewide socio-economic lockdown. The state organized the Israelites into labor gangs, forcing mass production of sun-dried bricks to build Pithom and Ramses. Tomb paintings show this reality. The labor was endless and repetitive. Identities were erased and replaced by a status as a state resource. In this system, the Israelites were effectively the fuel for the Egyptian machine. This left the underclass with no clear path to break the economic engine of a global superpower. The 10 plagues operated as a targeted assault on the infrastructure of the Egyptian state. This chart shows the primary pillars of the Egyptian economy. The plagues on the livestock and the crops effectively wiped out the nation's capital and its food supply, sending those pillars to zero. Even the biological plagues and the days of total darkness struck the human engine of the empire. Laborers who are sick or blinded cannot produce, which brought the state's total labor productivity to a standstill. When the Israelites finally departed, they moved as an organized nation rather than a group of fleeing refugees. They left carrying significant wealth, quantities of silver, gold, and clothing given to them by the Egyptians. This massive transfer of resources functioned as a settlement for 400 years of unpaid, enslaved labor. The Israelites were physically free and holding immense wealth, but they were still a people shaped by the culture of their oppressors. The next challenge was preventing the newly freed population from simply building a new version of the system they had just escaped. The assembly at Mount Sinai functioned as the drafting of a new social and political contract. This scale compares the Sinai Code with the Code of Hammurabi. Hammurabi prioritized elite assets, placing a higher value on property than on human life. The Sinai Code established a different priority, defining a society where human dignity was set above the value of property. Under this law, servants were granted specific rights and a guaranteed path to freedom, prohibiting the kind of permanent, state-owned slavery found in Egypt. This focus on economic justice extended to the Ten Commandments, particularly the ban on idol worship. In the ancient Near East, an idol functioned as a wealth-gathering mechanism, offerings funneled directly to priests and kings at the top. By banning idols, the Israelites removed this hoarding tool, allowing wealth to distribute horizontally among the people. This decentralized wealth meant power stayed with the population. Instead of a pyramid with a pharaoh at the top, the Sinai Code attempted to build a society where every member shared the responsibility of leadership. The Exodus ended with a legal code that prioritized the protection of people over the preservation of property. It offered a practical framework for maintaining a society that refused to return to the extraction economy of Egypt.